We are, let's see, we are recording.
You're a wonderful wife.
But,
tell us from time to time.
Well, you find a good one. It's just nice to have.
So you think you're gonna stay home and record? Stay home and record the live?
I probably can, and he wants me to, whether someone's here or not, to go ahead and record for archive purposes, and then you can go on the line and watch it if you want.
Okay.
Okay, we are ready to start this evening, or our class tonight, or it's still evening. Now, in chapter 6 of 2 Samuel, you have this. I don't know if you're keeping up with it or not, but we're trying to follow this. We can't hit all of the points, but we can hit the highlights and make sort of get some sense and a sense of history out of what we're studying. In 2 Samuel chapter 6, David is getting ready. He wants to move the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. Now, the Ark of the Covenant is that thing, that box that had the mercy seat on top of it, and it had the cherubim driven in the tabernacle and all. And it was where God said that he would dwell. And it had the mercy seat and so on. And it had been at another place for some, I guess, about 18 years or so. And David thought that it was time to bring it to Jerusalem. He'd gone through the battles and so forth, and he had taken Jerusalem. And he had would either had built or would soon build him a house of a mansion, so to speak. But he wants to bring the ark to Jerusalem. So in verse 2 it says, "And David arose and went with all the people who were with him to Baal Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, whose is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, who dwells between the cherubim. So they set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on a hill, and Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drove the new cart." Now, if you're going to move something like this, and God has given directions as to how to move it, is he going to be pleased if you don't follow those directions? Not so. Not so. And we have in the church, in studying the Old Testament, we have sort of looked down upon Uzzah, the son of Abinadab. God wasn't being vindictive. God had said that when he gave all kinds of instruction how to build the tabernacle, and he had silversmiths and all come in and build. Moses did and to build it, and God said, "You build it." All of these things according to the pattern that I showed you in the mountain. Mm-hmm. And when they were to move, God gave instructions as to who and how this Ark of the Covenant would be moved. And there's nothing in those instructions about a new cart and on wheels or anything like that. But David did this, and so they set the Ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill and so forth. And then they brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill, accompanying the Ark of the God, and Ahio went before the ark. Ahio before the ark, and David and all the house of Israel played music before the Lord, and all kinds of instruments of wood on harps and stringed instruments and tambourines and systems and cymbals. I don't know what a system is, but it's some sort of musical instrument, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And when they came to Nachon's, threshing floor. So they are now. You have to understand in that part of the world at that time, and even in some parts of the world, like today, the way they, well, of course, now they have mechanical things to do with, but they would take, I may have used this illustration before, they'd take a piece of land, maybe as big as this room, maybe even as twice as big as this room, and then they would cut the sheaves of barley and wheat and so forth, and they would bring them and they would throw them on this threshing floor. And then generally, I don't know how it was then, but in Korea, they still do that, as they did when we were there back in the early 50s. They would they would make it muddy and wet, and then they'd get on it, pack it down and let it dry out, so it'd be very hard. And then they bring that in, and women would take sticks, or sometimes they would have a pipe or something, small pipe on a rope, and with a stick, and they would use that, and they would beat that those sheaves of wheat or barley, whatever, until till all of the grains or the kernels fell out, and then they would rake the chaff away, and that was a threshing floor. They in Korea they would try to do it on a windy day. Then they built them a little thing with like a bicycle, but it operated a fan, and one of the old men would pedal that thing all day to blow the chaff away. But anyway, this is what a threshing floor was. So when they come to this threshing floor, the ark of the oxen carrying the ark or pulling the ark stumble. And now Uzzah and his brother, who are the sons of Abinadab, they have had this in their house something like 3 months, this Ark of the Covenant. Probably have come to respect it and love it, and it showed or represented the presence of God. And you know that they would not have done anything to have harmed that thing. Mm-hmm. In fact, here it comes. What would if you were dragging something, or you had a cart or something, rolling some of your stuff that you didn't, dishes or whatever, you didn't want to get broken or whatever, and you were pulling it through the house. Him to do that. Grab it, reach up and grab it.
But weren't the Levites the only ones supposed to
the Levites
handle it?
Right, that's the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
They used the wrong means with the cart, and they used the wrong people. And this, I don't like to use this type of terminology, but you don't mess with God when He's. We in the Lord's church, I won't say pride ourselves, because it's not a matter of pride, it's a matter of love and obedience. But we teach that one must do what God says in the way that God says do it, for the reason that God says do it, because we want to please God. Mm-hmm. And Uzzah, in a moment of when he thought that thing was going to fall and crash or be destroyed, he reached up and God struck him dead. And
they all showed us also should have like foreseen that, if anything should happen and we have to move it, we can't have people there that's not, authorized to move it.
Right. The Levites should have been in charge of it all the way through. Now, they were supposed to have been. With God, and I think maybe one commentator that I read said that he may have been more angry with himself than with God because he cost the life of this person, but he probably realized by this time that he had not properly prepared that ark for movement, and he didn't bring the right people in to move it. Mm-hmm. And so whether that's true or not, he decided that he was going to leave the ark, and he left it in the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite. That's in verse 10. And it was there for 3 months, verse 11. And the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all of his household. And it was told David, saying, the Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark. So David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with gladness. And it was so, when those bearing the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces, he sacrificed oxen and fatted sheep. Now, there's the implication here that David, when he brought it up, people were bearing it, and that's how the Levites were to bear that. The Ark of the Covenant had 2 rings, gold rings, a pole through there, and covered with gold, I believe it was. But then they would put this up on their shoulders, and that's where they would carry it. 4 men would carry the thing, and David did it right this time, and it says there's a little comment here made in verse 16 that it tells something of Saul's wife or daughter that David married. It says, now as the ark of the covenant, or as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, Saul's daughter, looked through the lattice him in her heart. Now, she's going to accuse David of doing this naked, but he wasn't naked. He had on an ephod, and probably there was no immodesty involved in it, because David surely would not have purposefully done that. But it wasn't done like she thought it, that is, like Michal thought it would be. And so when the day was over, in verse 20, and David returned to bless his household, and Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, how glorious, and this is sarcasm, just dripping with sarcasm, how glorious was the king of Israel today, uncovering himself in the eyes of the maids of his servants, as one of those base fellows shamelessly uncovers himself. Now, we learned a lesson there, that there is a proper dress for people when they come before God. But evidently God did not have the same thought that Michal had here. So David said to Michal, it was before the Lord who chose me to, instead of your father and all his house, to appoint me a ruler over the people and over the Israel. Therefore I will play music before the Lord. And then he says, but as in the middle of verse 22, but as for the maidservants whom you have spoken, by them I will be held in honor. Therefore Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death. So her punishment for rebuking her husband, and it was a uncalled for rebuke. David was not doing anything that was sinful. At least there's no indication. She is the only one, I guess, that thought it was. But then we come to chapter 7. And by the way, anytime we have a question on this and we're skipping over, we'll say so.
I was going to say, I thought that Saul gave Michal to someone else.
No, he did. He first promised the first daughter, Merab, I believe her name was, but then he gave her away. And it was when David killed Goliath, that it said whoever killed Goliath, that Saul would give his daughter Merab to M-E-R-B-A-B, I think, Merab, and he would give her, but he had already, in the meantime, while David was doing the battling, he had already given this daughter. And then the Bible says that Michal, the second daughter of Saul, loved David, And so that Saul gave her to him. But then later on, Saul took her and gave her to somebody else. She was already David's wife, but because he was having problems with David, he gave Michael to someone else. And one of the conditions of Israel coming together again as a single nation, not divided with two different kings at that time, was that David said, before I'll have a treaty with you, you've got to bring me my wife, Michael, back to me. And Abner, I believe it was Abner, or whoever it was, brought her, and her husband followed her crying.
And I remember that.
And he was just told, go back. It was very different in those days, you know. There was a cruelty
like
there.
Property.
Yeah, the woman. Well, really? But now you take today in nations, even in India, where we go. We've been there 4 times. I know, and we're going back later on this year, stay 5 months. But in India, in the lower caste, women are just nothing more than just property. That's all. You can divorce them if you're an Indian lady and your husband dies, you don't inherit anything. Wow. Christianity has done more for women than anything else in the world. That God, Paul says, there's neither male nor female. We have differences in what we do and how we look and so forth. But as far as being equal in the eyes of God, there is no partiality at all. God doesn't show partiality, and I believe it's a sin. In fact, I know it's a sin to show partiality. I think in some of the stuff that's going on in the political world today, in both parties, to me it is that these people are so ungodly. How in the world? Yeah. How in the world could we want them to be our leaders? But that's another question, and we're not in the class on politics, and I'm not going to get into something like that. But I in all likelihood, I may be wrong, but I won't even vote because I can't bring myself to vote for any of them that's running right now. But anyway, we come to chapter 7. This is a pivotal chapter in the Old Testament and in the Bible, as a matter of fact. It's when God makes a covenant with David. We're going to start reading in verse 1 because it leads up to the reason that God makes a covenant with David. In verse 1 it says, now it came to pass when the king was dwelling in his house, and the Lord had given him rest from all of his enemies around, all of them, that the king said to Nathan the prophet, see now, I dwell in a house of cedar, but the ark of God dwells inside tent curtains. Then Nathan said to the king, go do all that is in your heart, for the Lord is with you. In other words, Nathan says, well, why don't you get up and build a house for the Lord, for a dwelling place for him? But it happened that that night that the word of the Lord came to Nathan, saying, go and tell my servant David, thus says the Lord, will you build a house for me to dwell in? Well, I have not dwelt in a house since the time that I brought the children of Israel up from Egypt, even to this day, but have moved about in a tent and in a tabernacle. Wherever have I moved about with all the children of Israel, have I ever spoken a word to anyone from the tribes of Israel whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, saying, why have you not built for me a house of cedar? In other words, God said, when did I ever tell anybody to build me a house of cedar? I've been in a tent, I've been in a tabernacle, and when have I ever told anybody? And then He says, now therefore, he's talking to Nathan, now therefore, thus shall you say to my servant David, thus says the Lord of hosts, I took you from the sheepfold and from following the sheep to be ruler over my people, over Israel. And I have been with you wherever you have gone, and have cut off all your enemies from before you, and have made you a great name, like the name of great men who are on the earth. Moreover, now here's where he begins to tell David that you're going to build a house, but it's not going to be a house of cedar. It's going to be a spiritual house. Moreover, I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and I will plant them, that they may dwell in a place of their own and move no more, nor shall the sons of wickedness oppress them any more as previously. Since the time that I commanded judges to be over the Lord tells you that he will make you a house. Now, God has said, I am not asking, I'm not telling you, I haven't asked you to build me a house. But I'm going to tell you, David, that I'm going to build you a house. And now, this, by the way, does not refer, there are some who say that some prophecies like this have a contemporary meaning and it has a far-reaching meaning. I don't believe this is one of them. He says that Solomon's going to build a temple, but the temple is not the house he's talking about. But let's go on and read. When your days are fulfilled and you rest with your fathers, I will set up your seed after you, who will come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He didn't say he'd establish the house. I'm going to establish your kingdom, or his kingdom. He shall build me a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he shall be my son. If he commits iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men and with the blows of the sons of men. But mercy shall not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I removed from before you, and your house and your kingdom shall be established forever. Before you, your throne shall be established forever. Now, according to all these words and according to all this vision, so said Nathan to David. Now, this section of scripture, especially verses 12 and through 16, comes to be known in the scriptures and in both Old Testament and New Testament as the sure mercies of David. This is where God makes him a promise. Now, notice the similarity of the words that he says, when your days are fulfilled and you rest with your father, I will set up your seed after you. In other words, this is going to be of the seed of David, that this kingdom is going to be established. Now, let's keep your finger there and go back to Genesis chapter 12. We find God I'm in Exodus, I'm not going to find it there. I got a new one of these Bibles. These pages are so flimsy. But anyway, going back to chapter 12, God has just told Abram, well, he tells him at this time in verse 12, chapter 12, verse 1, get out of your country, from your family, from your father's house, to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you, make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and curse those who curse you, and in you all families shall be blessed. Now then, turn over a few pages to chapter 22 of the book of Genesis. And this is after Abraham God said to Abram, take your son, your only son, take him over to a place I'll show you and offer him as a burnt offering to me. And Abraham, we all know the story that Abraham was willing to do that. In fact, he had raised the knife to kill his son, and God held his hand, or stayed his hand. It was then that the angel of the Lord, verse 15, then the angel of the Lord called Abraham a second time out of heaven and saying, by myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son, blessing, I will bless you, and multiplying, I will multiply you, and your descendants as the stars. I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven and as the sand which is on the seashore, and your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies. Now notice verse 18. In your seed all nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. Now notice that he says to Nathan says to David by God's appointment that when you rest with your fathers, he will set up of your seed. So we have that seed line. The seed line begins in chapter 3 and verse 15 of the book of Genesis. I mean, it begins on the earth. Before the earth was created, God determined that he was going to create man, and that he knew that man would sin, and he provided that he would give his son, the Word, as a sacrifice for sin. And when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, God told Adam that he would now work by the sweat of his face. He told Eve that she would, in pain, she will bear children. And he turned his attention to the snake, or to the serpent, represented as the devil, represented as serpent. He said, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. And her seed shall bruise your head, and your seed shall bruise his heel. So God is saying here that going to come one of the seed of woman. Now that's a strange statement. The seed is in the man. But here he says it's going to be of the seed of woman. Later on, Isaiah is going to say, behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son. And we read that all the way through, and we finally come to Matthew chapter 1, which gives the genealogy of Jesus. And David is in that genealogy. Abraham is in that genealogy. And he is, Matthew says that he is the fulfillment of the prophecy that his name shall be called Emmanuel, which being translated, Matthew said, means God with us. So you have, it is very interesting, by the way, if you ever have the time to do it, is to take that seed line from Genesis 3 and 15 and take it all the way to the Christ. It comes down sometimes to, well, one time it comes down to one little baby boy, 1 year old. If he had been killed, then there would have been no seed line. The seed line would have been broken. But you can follow that seed line all the way through. And it is this final seed, this one that's going to defeat Satan. This is the one that he is going to establish that eternal kingdom. And what is that eternal kingdom? Church. The church. Now, Solomon was going to have a glorious kingdom. We'll read about that some. We're not going to do a whole lot about it, but Solomon is going to have a glorious kingdom. But the kingdom that David is going to be, that his seed, that son that Isaiah, or that actually Nathan and then Isaiah prophesied of, it's going to be the spiritual kingdom of the Son of God, or King Jesus. When Jesus went back to the Father in the clouds, we're told that he was brought before the Ancient of Days, and there was given him three things: glory, dominion, and a kingdom. And that kingdom was established, and the gates of it were opened on the day of Pentecost when Peter preached and the Lord added to the church uh, uh, about 3,000 souls who had obeyed the gospel. So this passage right here is a pivotal, and they're both going to go into captivity. Stragglers will come back, but Israel will never be, after they go into captivity, when they come out, they'll never be an independent kingdom. They will be vassals to the whatever, well, to the Babylonians, to the Persians, to the Greeks, and then finally to the Romans. And in the days of the Roman kingdom, it's when Jesus died and his kingdom was established. So remember this, that if you don't remember anything else, when you read in Isaiah 55 or in Acts chapter 13 about sure mercies of David, he's talking, this writer is taking it back to this passage where God made this promise to David that out of his seed, there would come one that would build or that would establish an everlasting kingdom. And it would look at the last part of verse 16, your throne shall be established forever. So it's going to be called the throne of David. It's going to be called even later on the throne of Solomon, not talking about Solomon's ivory throne, but it's the kingdom. And then it is going to be called the throne of Christ, or David, or Christ is sitting on David's throne at the right hand of God. So this is an extremely important passage to remember where it is and how it plays. No longer, now there's going to be several kings. We're going to see even in the divided, there will be three kingdoms. There's been Saul, here's David, now there's going to be Solomon. And then after the division, there's going to be 19 kings in each one of those. But none of these fulfill this passage. It's not until the Christ comes that this passage is fulfilled. So, in the rest of that, David gives thanksgiving to God for what he has done. And in verse 22 and 23 in chapter 7, therefore, he's giving praise to God. He says, therefore you are great, O God, for there is none like you, nor is there any God beside you, according to all that we have heard with our ears. And who is like your people, like Israel, the one nation on the earth whom God went to redeem for himself as a people, to make a name for himself, and to do for your great and awesome deeds for your land, before your people, whom you redeemed for yourself from Egypt, the nations and their gods. Now here he's praising God for what he has done for Israel, the nation of Israel. Later on, there will be praise that will have more reference to this eternal kingdom, that it's not a physical kingdom, it's a spiritual kingdom. And in chapter 8, again, if you have this thing that we have, chapter 8, we talk about, we read about David's conquest. And he pretty much took everything, that all the land that was bordering Israel, he took that and added it to Israel. In fact, David, we read in Joshua that Joshua enlarged the borders or to everything that God had promised Moses and the children of Israel. Well, David even extends it further. David takes it all the way up to Damascus and into Syria, and he ruled. David was perhaps the most powerful ruler of his time in any nation, and Solomon, his son, was even more powerful. He wasn't a powerful warrior, but David had made it so he didn't have to be a warrior. But then down in verse 15 of chapter 8, the writer tells us something about the administration of David. Now, to me, this is important because when we come to chapter 1 of 1 Kings, there's going to be a shakeup in this, and some of these are going to be executed. One we're going to read about here. But let's just look at it for a moment and take a couple of minutes or a minute to read verses 15 through 8. So David reigned over all Israel, and David administered judgment and justice to all people. And here's his cabinet. Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was over the army. Jehoshaphat, son of Ahilud, was recorder. I guess that means he was the tax fellow or census fellow. Zadok, the son of Ahitub, and Abimelech, the son of Abiathar, were the priest. Sivriah was the scribe, and Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was over both the Cherethites and the Pelethites, and David's sons were chief ministers. Now, Benaiah here, he was over the personal bodyguard of David. And but now that we're going to read some of these same names over in the first couple of 3 chapters of Solomon's reign in 1 Kings, and you're going to find that Solomon's going to have some of these people put to death because they later on, when David was getting old and lying on his bed about to die, some of these people decided that they wanted to appoint their own king, and they appointed Adonijah, and it was treason, really. So and then chapter 9, now you know who Mephibosheth was.
Yeah.
He was the son of Saul, the only existing one that lasted, I think, who, as they were fleeing,
Jonathan's son.
He was Jonathan, grandson of Saul. But he was somehow his feet were hurt. He fell and his feet were hurt, and he was lame then from that time on. And David showed compassion to him, and he said that this man will. He still showed his respect for Saul, but not as much for Saul as he did for Jonathan. Now, how close were Jonathan and David? Extremely close. Yeah. And so David takes David takes this Mephibosheth. Let me get my lips wet so I can say it. Mephibosheth, I'll get it right in a moment, in Jerusalem. And he ate from David's table. In other words, David took care of him. And then in chapter 10, and there's not a lot in here that we need to cover. It's about some more of David's conquest. The Ammonites and the Syrians are defeated, and it almost becomes a time of peace. And then we come to chapter 11. So we're going to take some time with chapter 11. Here is one of the dark times in the history of Israel. To me, it's even darker than it was during the days of the judges, when the men went after idols. In chapter 11, beginning, it happened in the spring of the year, at the time when kings go out to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed the people of Ammon and besieged Rabbah but David remained at Jerusalem. Now, where is the king usually supposed to be when they are going into battle?
With the man.
He's to be the leader. If David had fulfilled his regal responsibilities, he would have been with. He might not have been up on the front line, but he would have been with the with his men. Then it happened, verse 2, one evening that David arose from his bed and walked on the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful to behold. Now again, you have to remember they built flat top houses. You don't have a lot of rain over there, Saul took Samuel took Saul up on the housetop, and that's where Saul slept that night. Well, this is what we have going here. But David was up probably 2 or 3 stories in his castle, and he looked across, and when we were in India, in the city of Shillong, we had a 4th-story building, and I could get up there on the top of that, and it's flat. I could get up on the local. In fact, we had some rabbits, or the students had some rabbits and chickens and other things. They grew up there. But you could get out and you could watch what other people were doing. I know I was standing here. I could look off down that way, and about 6 o'clock in the evening, a man would get out his sewing machine, and he would evidently he was one that was sewing for some big clothing company back here, but he was sewing 2 pieces of cloth together at different angles. But then he would do about 500 or 600 of those, and then he would.
Wow.
That's all he would do, and that he would, I guess, turn that into, or somebody would come and pick it up, and he got paid for it. But anyway, you can see what's going on. And David looked over, and he saw a woman bathing, and she was very beautiful. And okay, that's not the best thing that can be said, but at least he could have turned and walked away. But David sent and inquired about the woman, and someone said, "Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliab, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" Now, what at this point should David have done?
Well, left it alone.
Left it alone. You can't put it any better. It was none of his business. It wasn't his wife. If he accidentally, and evidently he wasn't expecting to see this, but if he accidentally saw this, he turns back and that's not for me. But now he sends and inquires about her. Maybe he thinks she's a single girl, and and then a king could command somebody to come to wife, or some woman to become their wife, and he would have concubine. And he could have done that. But he's told, we're not given the name of the one that told him, but he was told that this is Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite, who, by the way, is up on the front lines fighting your battles for you. Now, he didn't say that, but that's where Uriah was. Mm-hmm. So David sent messengers and took her. Now, you're talking about the property and disrespect for women.
Kidnapping.
Just, hey, I don't care who you're married to. You're coming over to me. We're going to do things that we ought not to do. And so she comes. She didn't have any choice. And she probably could have screamed and yelled, but nobody's going to buck the king, so to speak.
Right.
When he says, "You come." So he went into her and lay with her, and she was cleansed from her impurity, and she returned to her house. And it wasn't after some probably 2 to 3 months or so that she sent to David and told him and said, "I am with child." That prophecy
Mm-hmm.
and Nathan's parable, and it fits so well. But when then David said, now David has, okay, you can just see the panic of David. Now, what am I going to do? One commentator says that Uriah was more than likely a high-ranking officer, even the general in David's army.
Mm.
What am I going to do? How am I going to cover this up? Well, this is what we'll do. He says, he tells David, he sends to Joab, who is the commander, he's the general of David's army, and he says, send Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent Uriah the Hittite to David. You didn't know anything about it, just maybe, well, we don't know what he figured, but you can assume that he reported the battle. And when Uriah had come, David asked him how Joab was doing and how the people were doing and how the war prospered. Okay, that's all the small talk is out now.
Mm-hmm.
And David said to Uriah, now Uriah, and I'm going to add a word or two here, go down to your house and wash your feet. In other words, go down and take a bath, clean yourself up, get the battle dust off of you. So Uriah departed from the king's house, and a gift of food from the king followed him. He's really going to make him feel good. Mm-hmm. But Uriah, now, I'm not a suspicious man. I don't know if Uriah was or not, but why did David call Uriah back? And now he says, why don't you go down and spend the night with your wife? And hey, by the way, I'm going to send a nice tray of food down there for you. What? Now, you can assume, you can add things in there, but the fact is, this is what happened. How it was undercover or by sleight or whatever it happened. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his lord, and he did not go down to his house. Uh-oh, something else has got to be done. And so when they told David, saying, Uriah did not go down to the house, David then said to Uriah, did you not come from a journey? Why do you not go down to your house? In other words, go down and enjoy being home for a few days and do what husbands and wives do when they are reunited. They enjoy one another's company and so forth. So Uriah said to David, after David said, go down, he says, the ark and Israel and Judah are dwelling in tents, and my lord Joab and his servants of my lord and the servants of my lord are encamped in the open field. Shall I go down to my house, eat and drink, and to lie with my wife? As you live and as your soul lives, I will not do so, for I will not do this thing. Now here is a man, he is a Hittite, he is probably a naturalized citizen of Israel because he's high ranking in the army. But here you have a statement of patriotic zeal. I am not going to go down and enjoy the pleasures of married life or the pleasures of my home when my companions are out there fighting and dying. Mm-hmm. People who know me know that I was in the Korean War. A lot of times they'll tell me, just we appreciate your service that you gave. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that. I won't say I was all that patriotic. I wasn't unpatriotic. I was drafted and I was trained and I was told where to go and what to do when I got there, and I just followed orders. I was a military police in the Army.
Oh, okay.
And we guarded prisoners of war. We had about 34,000 prisoners of war.
Wow.
About 3,000 of us. We got because of our being in contact with them, and after the armistice sign, we're still in contact with them. All of those that were there, we were given combat status. So I'm according to the Army, I am a combat veteran of the Korean War. I didn't see any combat. We had fights and we had a lot of stuff for the prisoners, but because they wanted to kill us just like the others did, but they didn't have any weapons, and we did. But anyway, here was patriotism. Now, why doesn't David just say, Uriah, I have sinned. I have sinned against you. I have sinned against God. I have sinned against your wife. Please forgive me.
Well, when you have all that power, I guess you feel you're above reproach.
It's hard to tell the man, I would assume, I've never done this, I've never gone into another man's wife, but I would assume that it would be a hard thing to come home and tell my wife that I did that or whatever. But David, all he could think of, and this is why it's that dark time. There's a time when David, we're told that he was a man after God's own heart. Now, God forgave him of this, but God said you're going to have problems the rest of your life, and the rest of your life. We'll talk about that a little later on. Let me see what time we're having here. Oh, we got about 50 minutes. We'll stop about 10 minutes early to give you all a chance to get to the other classes. But David said to Uriah, wait here today, and this is verse 12, wait here today and also tomorrow, and I will let you depart. So Uriah remained that day and the next. He didn't go to his house, evidently. And when David called him, he ate and drank before him, and he made him drunk. And at the evening he went out to lie on his bed with the servants of the Lord, but he did not go down to his house. And in the morning it happened that David wrote a letter to Joab, sent it by the hand of Uriah. Now, if this is not, taking advantage of a terrible situation, you send the execution note by the one to be executed. And of course it would be sealed, so Uriah would not know what it said. And then he said, he wrote in the letter, set Uriah in the front of the hottest battle and retreat from him that he may be struck down and die. That's just cold-blooded murder. Mm-hmm. You see, you find the same thing in John chapter 11 when Jesus raised Lazarus. I believe John chapter 11, he raised Lazarus. And there were some that believed on Jesus when he did that, and others went and told the Pharisees. And they got together, and in the latter part of John chapter 11, they plotted the cold-blooded murder of the Son of God. And then later on, when Paul and Peter were preaching to them, they said, you intend to bring this man's blood on our head. And they had said before that, they told Pilate, let his blood be on us and upon our children, upon our children's children. But now, when the rubber came to meet the road, they weren't ready for that. But anyway, Uriah delivered the thing, and verse 17 says, the men of the city came out and fought with Joab, and some of the people of the servants of David fell, and Uriah the Hittite died also. Then Joab sent and told David all the things concerning the war, and charged the message, saying, when you have finished telling the matter of the war to the king, if it happens that the king's wrath arises, and he says to you, why did you approach so near to the city when you fought? Did you not know they would shoot from the wall? Who struck Abimelech with the son of Jerubbaal? Well, that's a big one. Was it not a woman who cast a piece of millstone on him from the wall, so that he died? Why did you go near the wall? Then he said, now, Joab is telling this messenger, he said, when David says all these things, then you say to him, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. The execution has taken place. What would a person, of course, Joab was a murderer in the first place. He murdered Abner, he murdered Amasa. We'll see that a little later on. But how could he have any respect for David after that? I can see why he may have wanted to go later on with Adonijah, another son of David, rather than Solomon. But anyway, this is just, you find 3 commandments of the 10 commandments violated in this occasion. Can you name them?
Don't covet your neighbor's wife.
Don't covet your neighbor's wife. Thou shalt not commit adultery.
Yeah.
Thou shalt not kill. And he committed all of them. And verse 25 says that then David said to the messenger, thus you shall say to Joab, do not let this thing displease you, for the sword devours one as well as another. In other words, it's not a big deal to if somebody got killed. You know, to Bathsheba, I like to think that Bathsheba is mostly innocent. She didn't scream and holler when she had to go there. She went voluntarily or she went peacefully. But she evidently had some love for Uriah, or he had love for her. But he was dead. And verse 27 says, and when her mourning was over, David brought her to his house, and she became his wife, and bore him a son. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord.
So he waited to stop mourning and then jump right on her.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay, it's time now. Come on over here. You know what?
Yeah, it's just, well, of course that, you know, in what I know of the Islamic religion, it's that way. If the head of a tribe or somebody, one of the big ones to just tell any woman, I read a statement from one just the other day. It was an actual statement of one defending it. He said that the woman in Islam is nothing, that she is at the beck and call. I'm not saying he, but she said at the beck and call of any man that wants her. And if 3 or 4 men, and I think they use those terms, if 3 or 4 men rape her, it is her fault, and she should be executed. And they do hang them. When a woman is raped, they hang her. And that's, well, David seems to me that almost resorted back to that kind of treachery and violence and ungodliness. But God is not finished with this. I'm going to stand for a minute, if y'all don't mind. Let me push that down so I'll cut the top of my head off. But verse 12, chapter 12, verse 1, again we have the sin in chapter 11. We have the rebuke and the results of that sin in chapter 12. Then the Lord sent Nathan to David, and he came to him and said to him, now here we have a parable. You find in the Old Testament, sometimes you find parables. There are a couple of times you find fables. There were two men in one city, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had an exceeding many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb which he had bought and nourished, and it grew up together with him and with his children. It ate his own food, or ate his own food, and drank from his own cup, and lay in his bosom, and was like a daughter to him. What's he describing here? A pet.
Mm-hmm.
This is a little pet lamb. We never had any dealings with sheep, and but we made pets out of different animals growing up. And now in my home, there's a little, probably 8-year-old Dachshund that she thinks that she owns the house, and we probably admit that she does, because she doesn't eat at our table, but she eats our food, and we feed her from the table. And this is describing a man who had an animal. He didn't have a daughter, but he had this little animal that she would lie in his bosom. In other words, she would sleep snuggled up or whatever. And so he here's the two. One has lots of them, one has only one. And a traveler came, this is verse 4, came to the rich man who refused to take from his own flock and from his own herd to prepare one for the wayfaring man who had come to him, but he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him. Here again is the rich oppressing the poor. Poor man didn't have anything to say about it. He just had to put up with it because David in verse 5, David's anger was greatly aroused against the man. He said to Nathan, "As the Lord lives, the man who has done this shall surely die." And he shall restore fourfold to the lamb, because he did this thing, and because he had no pity. Now, let's get the scenario here. Here is a king who has recently, some time back, long enough time back that the woman knows that she's with child, but he has committed adultery. He first coveted her, saw her, and coveted her. Then he called her over, and he broke another commandment, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." Then when he thought he was going to get caught in this, he takes the woman's husband and has him murdered. And so Nathan comes and tells him about this, makes it a parable, and David doesn't recognize it so much as a parable. He thinks it's a true story. And then David said to him, "You are the man." Now let's get this picture. You are a commanding general in the military, and I'm a private. I don't have any power at all over anybody. That's the only power I had when I was in the army, was power of a military man over the enemy, or power to follow orders. But I go to the general one day and I say, "You are murdering scum."
You can call
You just don't do that. You just don't do that. You'd be put before the firing squad or something else. How do you think Nathan felt at this time? He's standing before the king. The king can say shoot this man with an arrow. Or
You say
cut
you're
his head
lying.
off.
Kill him for lying about me.
Yeah.
Wow.
And you have killed this man. You are the man. Thus says the Lord God of Israel, I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house and your master's wives into your keeping, all these concubines that Saul would have had. And I gave you the house of Israel and Judah. And if that had been too little, I also would have given you much more. What else did you want? All you had to do was ask. Why have you despised the commandment of the Lord? Now, I believe there's a lesson here about attitude in this last phrase. Why have you despised the hand of the Lord? Why have you despised me? What does that tell us about when a person disobeys God? What kind of attitude? Oh, it doesn't make any difference. God doesn't care one way or the other. We talked about in Bible class Sunday morning some of the modern things that people are doing, that even in the church they're bringing in things that the Bible doesn't authorize. And when they do it, they'll say, and I've had this statement made to me, well, it's not a heaven and hell matter. In fact, I have been told by a fellow who held a PhD that to be baptized for remission of sins is not a matter of heaven or hell. He's not the church. That if a person is sincere and never been baptized, if he's living a good moral life, I can accept him as a brother.
Oh my.
Yeah. This is called in modern language postmodernism. There was modernism, and then this is modernism after, post means after modernism. Well, I would have done so much more. I would have done anything that you asked, but you took your master's, you took your servant's wife, you killed him, and in spite of the fact that I had given you Saul's concubines and so on, daughters, and he said, I would have given you much more. Why have you despised the commandment of the Lord to do evil? You have killed Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and you have taken his wife to be your wife, and you killed him with the sword of the people of Ammon. Therefore, of course, the people of Ammon would be Uriah would be Hittite. I believe they were also known as Hittites. But thus says the Lord. And when you read this in a place like this, it is the Lord getting ready to tell you what's going to happen to you. Judgment. I will raise up adversity against you from your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of all. For you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel, before the sun. So David said to Nathan, you have to appreciate David here. He's been caught, and he doesn't say, but wait, it wasn't my fault. I didn't know what I was doing. He like Achan of old. Achan, you remember Achan and Joshua, when Joshua said, tell us what you've done, Achan. And Achan said, I have sinned. And this is hard for people to say today. When people sin, we can always find an excuse or a reason, or well, it didn't. Yeah. I didn't hurt anybody.
They always say, "Well, I'm not perfect."
I didn't mean anything by it. Well, it doesn't matter what you meant. You did mean if you did it, and it was illegal to do, you sinned. So he said, "I have sinned," and David said, "The Lord has also put away your sin; you shall not die." So David, although he was a man after God's own heart, but from this point on, God still loves him. But God said that in your household there's going to be turmoil in all of your household. And then he says, however, because by this deed you have given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord, the child who is born to you shall surely die. Then Nathan departed to his house. My wife and I, in Dyersburg, Tennessee, she stood on one side of the bed and I stood on the other, of a little 9-year-old daughter that was dying of leukemia. The doctor came in and shook his head. He had been telling us to massage her to maybe help her breathe and stuff like that. But he says, you're just going to lose her if you do it anymore. She can't live. And within 3 hours of that, she was dead. I've had that statement. The child also shall surely die. That's hard. And not has anything to do with this lesson to continue the story. When our next child was born, he lived. We went to the Air Force, and one night on an icy road, 24 years old, he lost control, slid down an embankment. He wasn't speeding, no drugs, no liquor. He just lost control. He didn't have his seatbelt on. He rolled over and he fell out of the car, and the car rolled over and crushed him to death.
Ooh.
That's my third child and younger.
Oh, okay.
And I have one more. Or we have one more. Daughter. She. So, but it's all of us, not a one of us have not gone and experienced death in one way or the other. But when it's a child, I don't see, I'm not, again, this is not a political matter, it's a moral matter, it's a spiritual matter. I don't see how any mother can kill a child that is growing inside. I just don't see how she can do it. But they do, and we know it. About, 60 million times since 1973. But then we find David, the boy gets sick. The Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife bore to David, and it became ill. Therefore David pleaded with God for the child. David fasted and went in and lay all night on the ground. He did all of the things of true repentance and true begging. And the elders of the house came, tried to give him food. He wouldn't take it. And then on the 7th day, verse 18, it came to pass that the child died. Did God kill the child? No, not in that sense. The child evidently was born with some sort of disease or something, or some sort of malady. But when the child died, the servants were afraid to tell him, and David recognized the whispering that must have been going on, and he asked was the child dead, and they said the child is dead. And that's it. So he asked for food. He got up, cleaned himself up, took a bath, went in and worshiped some, and he took food. And the servants were perplexed. How is it that you were mourning and praying and had sackcloth? You were really putting yourself down while the child was living, but when he's dead, you have gotten up and cleaned yourself up. And that, again, we have one of those great statements in the Bible. This statement tells us the three things. Let's read it. Indeed, he said, this is the middle of verse 18, while the child was alive, we spoke to him, we spoke to him, and he would not, that is, we spoke to God, and he would not heed our voice. How can we tell? Oh, that no, I'm in the wrong one. Verse 19. When David saw that his servants were whispering, and then we want to come down to verse 21. Then his servant said to him, "What is this that you have done? You fasted and wept for the child while he was alive, but when the child died, you arose and ate food." He said, "While the child was alive, I fasted and wept, for I said, who can tell whether the Lord will be gracious to me that the child may live? But now he is dead. Why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me." Now, there are some lessons in that. The child is dead. Why should I fast? We can mourn for so long, but eventually you got to get up and go about life. Mm-hmm. When our two children on each occasion, when they died, we had a time of mourning. In fact, we had planned to move to Hong Kong and do mission work for 5 years. And he was killed about 20 days before we were ready to go, and we didn't go. We just were not in an emotional frame of mind that we could go into mission work at that time and leave our other children here. So, of course, they were both up, but and married. But here it tells us that the dead cannot return here. That when we die, we don't know anything else that goes on here. We can know, and the fact that the rich man told Abraham that I have 5 brothers, he knew they were here, but he didn't know what they were doing. And he said, send Lazarus to them. But it also tells us that infants, this is an infant child, that this infant child was not guilty of Adam's sin, and thus as sinful as the devil himself. Now, I use that term because in a book that I have, in a creed book that I have by a Baptist, written by a Baptist preacher, he made the statement that a child, the moment he is born, I'm quoting now, that he is a child of the devil, as mean as the devil, and that he is lost, and there is no hope for him unless and until the Spirit of God comes upon him.
Yes, Calvinism.
Calvinism, just Calvinism all the way, total depravity. And but we also learn that David says, "I can't bring him back, but I can go to him." This passage was read at our daughter's funeral. 9 months, do I have any problem with her being in sin and lost? No. If I know anything about the Bible, this passage tells me that little child will be where righteous people are. And so I know where my daughter is. I was told that my son, about 6 weeks before he was killed, that he had been unfaithful. He just wasn't attending, slacking, but he came before the church and told the elders of the congregation, "I have not been living like I ought to. I want to come back, and I want you to pray for me, that I'll be forgiven. And I promise you that for the rest of my life, I'm going to live a faithful Christian life." At his funeral, the preacher quoted him on that. He said, "As far as I know, he lived that kind of life in those 6 weeks." It's at least heartening to me to think that he will be there. But that's only God can judge that. But witnesses saw him and said that he, on the surface, he looked at it. But we learned that you can't bring the child back. The child was not a product of total depravity, and that we can go, if we live the life of a child, the innocence of a child, and so on, and we put our faith in God, we can go be with this children. And I look forward to that. Okay. We come to the second part of chapter 12, and we find that Solomon is born. And then we find the I just want one point I wanted to make here. I have it marked in chapter 12 when it says Solomon was born. It says, then David comforted Bathsheba, his wife, and went into her and lay with her, and she bore a son, and he, that is, David, called his name Solomon. Now the Lord loved him, and he sent word by the hand of the prophet, of Nathan the prophet. So he, that is, either the prophet or David, by the prophet's command of God, he named him Jedediah. So when you think about the name Solomon, Solomon had another name given to him by the prophet or given to him by God. It's Jedediah because of the Lord. Have we studied about another man that was given a name? That God changed his name.
Jacob.
Okay, Jacob to Israel. I hadn't thought about them, but in the book of Judges, who was it? Gideon. When Gideon had done all that he had done, and he settled down, his name was changed to Jerubbaal. And I think it's the last part of that section that is about Gideon. Not that that is a big deal. When I read this, I think about that. Now, God told David that there's going to be problems in your household. And it's going to be there as long as you live and even after you live. There's going to be killing and all kinds of things in your household. So we come as an example of that, and we come to Ammon and Tamar. Now, Ammon was a son of David. Absalom was a son of David. Tamar was a daughter of David, evidently by the same mother as Absalom, but not by the same mother as Ammon. So that's the scenario that comes here, and this is going to be the start of war in David's household, to the point that Absalom is going to try to usurp the throne and try to kill his father. Now, after this, Absalom, the son of David, had a lovely sister whose name was Tamar, and Ammon, the son of David, loved her. Now, it wasn't exactly permitted under the law. You could marry cousins, but you couldn't marry your sister, supposedly. But Abraham married his half sister. You understand? You remember that? Mm-hmm. And so here we have this. So it evidently was allowed to some degree. So Ammon was so distressed over his sister that he became sick, for she was a virgin, and it was improper for Ammon to do anything to her. But Ammon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, and the son of Shemaiah, David's brother. And Jonadab said, he was a very crafty man. He said, "Why are you the king's son, becoming thinner each day or day after day? Will you not tell me what's wrong with you?" And Ammon said, I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. And Jonadab said, "Well, don't worry about it. Here's what to do. Get in your bed and pretend to be sick. And when your father comes to see you, say to him, 'Hey, Dad,'" and I'm paraphrasing here, but, "Hey, Dad, would you send Tamar, my half-sister, or Absalom's sister, to me that she might cook for me and take care of me and feed me. And so David sent home to Tamar and said, go down and to your brother and prepare food for him. So Tamar went to her brother Ammon's house, and he was lying down, and she took flour and kneaded it and made cakes in his sight and baked the cakes. She took the pan and placed them out before him, but he refused to eat. And Ammon said, have everyone go from me. So there were evidently servants in there. And they went out from him, and Ammon said to Tamar, bring the food into the bedroom that I may eat from your hand. Now, here you wonder, does she suspect anything? It seems that she may, according to some scholars. But anyway, he not only wanted to get in the room, but he wanted her to hand feed him. Now, when she brought him them to him to eat, he took hold of her and said, come lie with me, my sister. But she answered, no, my brother, do not force me, for no such thing should be done in Israel. Do not do this disgraceful thing. And where could I take my shame? And as for you, you would be like one of the fools of Israel. Now, therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you. In other words, she is not, in the eyes of the way I read it and others read it, she's not saying, I'm willing to do this. But she says, if you're going to do this, at least make it legal. Let the king give me to you as a wife. And but he wouldn't listen. So he was stronger than her, and he forced her and lay with her. Then Ammon hated her exceedingly, so that he hated with the hate with of sending me away is worse than the other that you did to me. But he would not listen to her. So she has no choice. He called a servant, told him to put her out, and closed the door. And she had on a robe of many colors, which was the robe of the dress of a king's virgin daughters. And she took that off, or she tore it, and she put ashes on her head and tore her robe of many colors that was on her, and laid her hand on her head and went away crying bitterly. And evidently Absalom, she went back to Absalom, her brother, and he said to her, has Ammon your brother been with you? But now behold, you're at peace. Now hold your peace, my sister, for he is your brother. Do not take this thing to heart. So Tamar remained desolate in her brother's house, the house of Absalom. Now, when David had heard these things, he was very angry with Absalom, and he spoke to that he and Absalom spoke to his brother neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Ammon because he had forced his sister. So there's the situation. And now Absalom after a while, Absalom tells the king, gets permission from the king to throw a feast, to have a feast, and he wants all of the king's sons to come. And David says, and this is the rest of down through verse 33, and David says, we better not let them all go. And Absalom said, well, at least let my older brother Ammon, let him come, and so that he can be there. And so the king said he could go. And while they were down there, Absalom, verse 28, now Absalom had commanded his servants, saying, watch now, when Ammon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say to you, strike Ammon, then kill him, do not be afraid. Have I not commanded you, be courageous and valiant? So the servants of Ammon did to Ammon, the servants of Absalom did to Ammon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and each one got on his mule and fled. But the news came back to David that all of his sons had been killed, but then someone came and said, no. In verse 33, now therefore let not my heart Or let not my lord the king take this thing to heart, to think that all the king's sons are dead, for only Ammon is dead. And then in the next part of it, we're told that Absalom he flees from Jerusalem. He goes north, up on the other side, the north side of the Sea of Galilee, to a place, area called Asher or Gesher, and he stays there, and he stays there until later times. Well, the story goes on, and I marked very few things in here because it's a story that we can learn lessons from, but it's just a story of what was happening in one man's family. And after a while, Joab, David's general, says, "You need to let Absalom come home." David first said no, and so Absalom or Joab hired a woman to go in and plead before David, give him a fictitious story, and much like David or like Nathan did, and so David. When she came and said she wanted to talk to him, in verse 13, so the woman said, "Why have you schemed such a thing against the people of God? For the king speaks this thing as one who is guilty, in that the king does not bring his banished son home again." She had talked about one that had been banished and would not come back. And then, but now she applies that same thing to David as Nathan did. And then she says a statement that you hear at funerals quite a bit. "For we surely die and become like water spilt on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again." Death was like water spilt upon the ground. On a hot summer day, you throw a bucket of water out, and what does it do? It just disappears.
14.
Yeah, verse 14. So David forgives Absalom. He lets him come back, and that takes us into chapter 15. We're going to go about 7 or 8 minutes more and probably get to through verse about 12. But anyway, after this, it happened that Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. Here's a man that wants attention. Now Absalom would rise early and stand by the way of the gate. So it was when anyone who had a lawsuit came to the king for a decision, that Absalom would call to him and say, "What city are you from?" He would say, "Your servant is from such and such a tribe of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your case is good and right, but there is no deputy of the king to hear you." Moreover, Absalom would say, "Oh, that I were made judge in the land, and everyone who had any suit or cause would come to me, then I would give him justice." Sounds just like a politician, doesn't it? And it was so whenever anyone came near to bow before him, that he would put his hand and take him, and put out his hand and take him and kiss him. In this manner, Absalom acted toward all Israel, so that who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. How many people do you know, have known, who perhaps would have become Christians, or maybe they had already become Christians, but then some slick talking preacher making ungodly and false claims came along and told them you don't have to be baptized to be saved. Oh man, you don't have to go to church. There's nothing wrong with instrumental music. And you go out and eat, drink, and be merry. God will forgive us. Oh, God doesn't pay any attention. It's not hurting Him.
Mhm.
We all know somebody in our lifetime
Yeah.
that's happened to, and that's exactly what Absalom was doing. Only he had the power that he could say, "Now, if you follow me, then I'm going to be king." And it's not saying that exactly, but that's what he's working for. If you follow me, I'm going to be king one day, and I'll do right by you. I'll put a chicken in every pot. So
I had a situation where I was talking to a young lady about one church and about baptism, and she said, "Oh, this sounds good." She said, "We have to talk again." And the next time I talked to her, she had changed. Her enthusiasm wasn't there anymore, and she was kind of negative. So there was another friend of ours, his name was John, and I said she talked to him because they come from the same background. So I happened to see him. I didn't ask him, but he talked to her. So I just nonchalantly said, "I was talking with so-and-so about this, and he said, "Yeah, she told me."
yeah,
So, because I knew she went back to him because they buddy, and they come from the same background. When she was real nonchalant about it and just real defensive, I said she talked to her other friend, and I got a way of asking without directly asking, and he said, "Yeah, oh yeah, she talked to me about it." I just let it go. I said, "Okay, y'all got together and figured it out for yourselves." And
so she talked to an Absalom.
yeah.
Yeah.
So from that moment on, she was different. She wasn't as friendly anymore. She wasn't as like I would see, "Oh, hi, Drew." She wasn't like that anymore. It kind of changed her.
Yeah, I did that similar thing. I used to work out in a gym in Florida. There was a fellow in there. We had conversations, and he was a dyed-in-the-wool Methodist, and he didn't believe in baptism. And he introduced me to his preacher one time who was there working out. And he said, "This preacher," of course, he introduced me, and then we went on off and left the preacher. But he said, "This preacher really knows the Bible, and he really knows how to tell people how to be saved." And I said, "Well, what did you tell them?" And I said, "Well," he said, "Well, he just says, pray the sinner's prayer, and that's what you do." And I said, "Well, what do you do about baptism? The Bible's command to be baptized." He said, "Oh, baptism doesn't mean anything. All baptism does is get you wet." And after that, we didn't have too much conversation. He didn't want to talk to me. So the smooth talking Methodist preacher had convinced him. He was one that did not study the Bible. He wouldn't know if Jesus was crucified on Calvary or shot in Okinawa. But this preacher comes in with this smooth talk, and you look at the Joel Osteen thing. You watch that. And, well, we're going to give you about some time. Let's start at we'll start at chapter 16, and we won't spend a lot of time. I want to get I want to get out of First Samuel or Second Samuel next week and get into First Kings, but y'all won't be here next week, right?
Right.
Okay. Well, we'll see what he wants to do, and if he wants to go ahead and do it, well, I will. If not, we'll just hold it till that time, and that's when we'll pick up. Thank you for being here.
Okay. Thank you.
I enjoy your comments, your questions, and
Okay.
no.
Yeah. So this young lady, she changed on me.